there. I don't know. I don't know what happened to him, how he got injured.
Good morning and welcome to the Airport Zoning Board for June 10th, 2025. We'll call the meeting to order. I would ask for approval of the agenda with an amendment to add public comment before and at the end, prior to, for people to discuss. Is there a motion?
Support.
I have a motion support. All those in favor signify by saying yes.
Yes.
Opposed, no. Motion carried. Approval of the minutes of April 15th, 2025.
So move. Support.
I have a motion by Commissioner Martis. Who supported that? I'm sorry, Commissioner Ungst. All those in favor, any additions or corrections? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying yes.
Yes.
Opposed, no. Motion carried. Public comment for any item on the agenda. Public comment for, yes, if you come up and state your name and your address and also fill out one of those forms.
Sure. My name is Jim Binns. My address is 9338 Berkey Highway, Blissfield, Michigan. I'm a Ragged Township resident. I own the private airport that's located south of Blissfield, which has been in continuous use since 1978. I'm here today because the FAA has determined that several of the proposed wind turbines fall within the climb descent area of the ends of the runway. If constructed, these turbines would be considered hazardous obstructions. It's important to note that the FAA does not have the authority to prevent structures from being built near airports. This responsibility lies with local zoning authorities. Up until the passage of PA 233, Ragged Township zoning provided us with that critical protection. Today, I am respectfully asking the board to extend to our airport a portion of the same protection it grants its own airport. This request would affect only relocation of a few wind turbines that pose a clear safety hazard, not the entire wind energy project. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Thank you. Old business, request to review the airport zoning ordinance, and we'll turn that over to Administrator Murphy, and she'll probably go ahead.
Yeah, the purpose of today's meeting, if you recall, is the board had requested the ability to talk to Ms. Ward about extending the local ordinance, our local zoning ordinance to privately owned but publicly used airports within the county. And so she has prepared a presentation, which she is going to go over to try to address some of those things. I also want to let you know that Attorney Courtney Krause is also here today. She works with Attorney Galuli at Guerin Lukow Miller. She has reviewed the proposed new drafted ordinance or the changes to the existing ordinance. So she is here as an expert to answer any questions that you may have on the ordinance. So today's meeting is more about gathering information, answering any questions that you have of the resources that we've been able to bring before you, and then potentially make a decision at a future meeting on what we want to do with our current ordinance. So, Ms. Ward?
Perfect setups, Kim. Thanks. So good morning. I'm going to walk you very briefly through three kind of concepts, I'll call them. One is just reminding you of the different surfaces that we have involved, because there's a number of them and they layer on top of each other in terms of what you would be including in the ordinance. A discussion of which airports would be available if you wanted to consider those that are in the county. And then lastly, some thoughts about what I've dubbed considerations, some pros and cons. Should we go to the next slide? So there are a number of surfaces that we talk about. One was just mentioned in the public comment. So first and foremost, we have FAR Part 77 surfaces. So those are surfaces that the FAA are reviewing on your behalf. They're considered to be advisory. So your grant assurances that you take as Lenawee County, because you're a federally obligated airport, make them a requirement for you to maintain those clear. The other airports that are in the county, they are simply advisory because they are not federally obligated, meaning they don't take federal dollars. Those include 5 different surfaces, and I think we've discussed them before. They kind of create a bowl, or I describe as a football field, in terms of the runway being the playing field, going to the outer edge where you can see the circle, and I'll give you a better graphic in a minute to show you that. We also have the airport approach plan zones. So those are locally adopted in terms of at the state of Michigan. Back in the early 2000s, they established these for every public use airport in the state. So not only does Lenawee County Airport, but the other public use airports in the county also have those. So they already exist and theoretically have been implemented since the early 2000s. I say theoretically because we certainly know that in a number of locations, that's not what's happening. So we'll talk more about that in a moment. And then last but not least is the current zoning ordinance itself that you have here for Lenawee County Airport, ADG, that has a height and notification rings that are a 3 mile, a 6.5, or 6.32, and a 10-mile radius. So if you go to the next slide, please. The question was asked of us if we covered the other airports in the county. So what you see before you on the slide is, in addition to Lenawee County Airport here, ADG, we do have 5 other public use facilities within the county. We have in Bettsfield and Blissfield, and then we have 3 airports and 1 heliport, all that are considered to be in Tecumseh. Of those, the last one, and that's the reason it's bolded, is Van Camp's heliport. Our recommendation would be to not do anything with the heliport, only because it has no surfaces associated with it. There's no Part 77 surfaces associated with that, and there is no airport approach plan. So we would be hard pressed to identify and define surfaces around that. There are some heliport operational criteria that we could utilize if we wanted to get into that, but it would be a bit more of an exercise for us to develop a surface to protect that airport. The other 4 airports do have existing surfaces, and I'll show you a graphic of that in a moment, that we would be able to utilize should we want to bring them into the ordinance. Next slide. So this gives you a graphic representation of those locations. So the 3 green circles that you see around Lenawee County Airport, ADG, are the 3, the 6.32, and the 10-mile surface. So you can see it's a very large area, 16 different townships that are already encumbered by the current airport zoning ordinance that we are supposed to be looking at and administering under the current ordinance as it sits today. Then you can see with the white dots up to the 4 white dots up to the upper right-hand side, and then the Blissfield on the lower, about middle of the right-hand side. So when we add in those, which when we go to the next slide, you'll see we encumber 2 additional townships. We add Clinton and Macon Township into the equation, as well as Blissfield and Tecumseh into the equation. So a fairly large number of municipalities between the townships and the cities that then would be encumbered by this. Now, having said that, all of those are already encumbered today, again, theoretically, by these approach plans and the Part 77 surfaces. So you can see, and we're going to do a drill down, but when you look at the graphic, you can see that 2 in particular probably definitely have some merit in terms of including in the zoning ordinance, both Blissfield, Betts Airport, as well as Tecumseh, Marilat, because they overlap the ADG surfaces. Both of them you can see on the right-hand side, lower right, where Betts Airport, a number of their Part 77 surfaces, which are the black circles or ovals, and some of their approach plan, which is the kind of light blue color, extend into the 10-mile radius of Lenawee County Airport's surfaces. So I could make a strong argument that it makes sense to include that, because if you had something that was happening out there, you'd want to be vetting that for both of those airports. Same thing can be set up there with Tecumseh Marilat Airport. They also, you can see both their approach plan with the light blue, excuse me, and then the black ovals extend into that 10-mile radius. If we go to the next slide, please. I have just a blow up here so you can see in more detail for each of the other public use airports. Here, if we look at Betts, we have 2 townships that are currently involved. So hopefully, both Palmyra and Blissfield townships are currently administering the airport approach plan as it's supposed to be administered. I did not do any research to find out if that's the case or not, but theoretically, any land use changes that are happening within those blue areas, those approach plan zones, are supposed to be being vetted through both townships or whichever townships they're affecting. I don't know if that's happening. If we go to the next graphic, you can see the 3 Tecumseh area airports all have intersecting surfaces. So again, if a unified approach to this would be beneficial up there, where you can see that the Part 77 surfaces, which are those black ovals again, are intersecting in each case for each one of the airports. So Tecumseh, Al Myers, the one which is on the left-hand side, upper left-hand side, does have some of their surfaces that extend into the city of Tecumseh, and Tecumseh Marilat, which is the one on the bottom side labeled 34G, also extends up into Tecumseh. So right now, hopefully Tecumseh, Clinton, Macon, and Raisin townships, as well as the city of Tecumseh, are all administering the approach plan in its intent. Again, I'm not sure if that's the case or not. So those are surfaces that should be looked at. And then if you go to the next slide, that shows you just a little more of a blow up. And again, you can see how those surfaces are pushing into Tecumseh with their area. We go to the next slide. Some of the things that we would recommend if we decide that we do want to include those other airports into the ordinance, as well as if we just leave it in as just Lenawee County Airport, would be some additional detailed drawings that would make it easier to administer this, so that somebody who's looking to do development near any of these airports has more information available to them. So this would be one example. So this is showing you the 3-mile radius, the Part 77 surfaces, and the approach zones. So it's a lot in one drawing, but it is very comprehensive of showing you that anything basically within that area really needs to be vetted, because that's anything that would be from ground level up to 150 feet in height. And then everything that you see encumbered with that lighter blue color, that has land use strategies that are supposed to be administered and have been since, for Lenawee County Airport in particular, since 2004. So hopefully those have been, administered, and that's where, again, those details would help us. If you go to the next slide, this is an example of that area. So this is the runway 23 approach, as well as the runway 19 approach. Or excuse me, yeah. Nope, I got that mislabeled. Sorry about that. That would give us more detail. So one of the things that we would recommend is we could give these shape files to the county for their planning department use, as well as the townships, where we could put them into the GIS framework, so that if somebody's looking at these are surfaces that they could turn on and off, so that they could see where this development may or may not be appropriate to take place. We go to the next slide. So just briefly, because I know we're pressed for time, we want to make sure you've got time to talk about the ordinance itself. Some pros and cons about do we or don't we include those other 4 airports. Some of the pros would be a consistency of administration. So if you're a developer, property owner within the county, if the county included them within the zoning ordinance, it would be all encompassing, because right now it's strictly focused on Lenawee County Airport here in Adrian. This would open that up and provide a continuity across the county. And so if you're in any of those zones, it would mean the same thing across the board. We also anticipate that would provide us with some additional awareness, because we would have to create a process where those townships are administering that back up here through the county and be able to distribute it back out. In other places where we've seen this sort of thing done on a county basis, they have established annual check-in meetings, if you will, for lack of a better term, to see how are we administering it, are things coming across our desk appropriately, and be able to provide that. Again, it would also provide additional county control, because you can see something could happen out there near Blissfield or the Marilat Airport that could have an impact that right now is not going to be on your radar if we only look at just Lenawee County Airport as a part of the zoning ordinance. And it is going to give you better preservation of the airspace. If we have that unified look, you can see how all those surfaces blended together is going to provide for additional insight that, again, has to happen here at the local level. As the public comment made mention, right now, we don't have the ability to do that because FAA is purely a review authority. They don't have approval authority or preclusion authority. So it does have to land here at the local level. Some of the cons, though, however, are that it certainly is going to create additional responsibility at the county level for that administration, because it would be a county level ordinance. And so that would make additional review process that would have to be stood up here for the county. Also, time and control cost for that additional review. Developing what that looks like. We certainly could assist somewhat in standing up determining what does need to have to come across. So for example, if you had a basic shed addition on something that is in one of those approach zones, we may be able to establish that if it doesn't, protrude any taller than the existing building, things like that, that would make it so what we don't want is every building permit within those 18 townships coming to the county. So we would assist in developing what does that language look like. And then last, that we feel is kind of appropriate to note is just it may limit local control. So if you do bring it here to the county, it obviously is going to create a process that all of that area that's encumbered is going to come through a county process. Some of the local airports may not be interested in bringing that to the table. I don't know. And again, theoretically, that's already happening today. All of those townships should be administering those blue areas on behalf of those airports. Whether they are or not is up for debate. And that's not an Adrian or a Lenawee County thing. That's across the entire state. I've got plenty of clients who I walk in and say, well, is your neighboring township doing X? And I get what I call the blinking owl, where they stare blindly back at me and have no idea what I'm talking about. So that is a concern. We do have some airports that just the approach plans themselves have been an issue because they do, again, have both the height as well as the land use restrictions. And so, we have seen some what were publicly used airports close because of those land use restrictions of what it was doing to the neighboring properties. So just kind of a caution that, that could be an issue. So I have not reached out to any of the airports to, vet them in terms of what their interest in participating is or isn't. But that's kind of gives you the framework of the what. If you go to the last slide, so just we've tried to highlight a few of the things that we believe would be additional work effort that we would need to do to bring the existing ordinance to include them if you chose to do that. One would be the creation of an administrative process. So, we would offer to work with you and your legal counsel and probably your planning and development department, I'm assuming, as to what does that look like to create a process of how would an applicant know that they're supposed to do this, and what would the municipalities that are impacted, the townships and the cities, do to bring it to the county for review. The language itself in the ordinance, we would have to update that to reference all of the airports. We'd have to update that to reference all of the surfaces graphically, define that administrative process, and then also update the language itself for all of that, which my guess is we would assist with some of that, but it would be legal counsel who would do the heavy lifting on that. We'd also recommend that we would then create some unified graphics across that, similar to those samples I just showed you, where we would both develop it in the GIS platform with shape files, but also some hard copy deliverables that could be left at the township. So if somebody walked in and asked a question, they would have a framework to look at and say, well, how does that affect my township and where is it? And then last but not least, if you wanted assistance with public outreach or engagement towards the adoption of that, we could assist in that and explaining the who, what, where, and why. So with that, that's kind of the quick and dirty version of what happens if we consider adding the rest of them in. Certainly doable. I think from a practitioner standpoint, it would be beneficial because then you would have a level playing field across the entire county as far as what's happening. Certainly would make some additional administrative work here at the county level. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
So questions as we move ahead. I have one question. The heliport at the hospital's not an issue if the other heliport's not, so.
It is not open for public use. That's why it's not identified.
Okay.
So again, if you wanted to, both heliports, there is heliport design criteria that we could certainly include in it if you wanted to. I just can't put my finger on anything that already exists today that is, supposed to be being administered.
Not looking for additional words.
Okay.
Had a question. Okay, questions? Wow. Nobody? What's the pleasure of the commission then? And moving forward? Commissioner Martis?
Well, our next step is, I mean, we do have some proposed language revisions for the ordinance. So it would seem we should want to meet and at least take action on some of those things, or at least push that ball further down the field.
Okay. Oh, Commissioner Stimson.
Just a question, probably mostly for Mr. Galooly. What's the process? We don't do a lot of ordinance work at the county level because they don't have general law ordinances. What's the process of adoption of that? I just forget. I apologize. Usually there's a public reading and it has to be noticed and.
Yes, there's typically 2 public readings, and then during a meeting, you would vote on it and adopt it.
You know, I understand what Ms. Ward just gave us the information and how beneficial it may be overall in the county. It gets down to dollars and cents when I look at it as well. You know, what's the cost of doing this? And if it's, you know, substantial, are the people that have the airports interested in sharing in that? So that's my concern. Commissioner Collins.
There's a lot of information there and a little tough to digest it all, but what is the involvement of village, townships, cities? Do they also have to adopt this? Or do they have to commit to certain programs?
For all of them that are already established, so all of them basically that we've already looked at the 4, they're supposed to be adopting that and doing it already. So the Zoning Enabling Act, when it made reference to the airport approach plans, is that each one of them is supposed to be administering that on the airport's behalf already.
So that if that were to be included in our zoning ordinance, would it require further action on their part, or?
I would have to defer to legal counsel, but it's my understanding that basically you would remove their participation because you would include them within the zoning or the county. Zoning. You would assume that, correct? Which again, I'm not sure that they're administering it today. And so, that might be a benefit because it might not be being administered today.
So if they are out doing it, we would still have to assume that responsibility.
Correct. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, I think you're absolutely correct. They would be removed from the decision-making process in terms of the amended ordinance. However, as Ms. Ward said, it would be a good idea to get on the public relations trail, do local meetings where residents, governmental leaders will know exactly the changes being made to the ordinance, why they're being made, things of that nature.
Administrator Murphy.
I just want to come in. I know we're talking right now about the possibility of a few additional townships, villages, cities, et cetera, if we bring in these private public use airports. But as we've been going through this process of updating our current ordinance and establishing our zoning board and our zoning board of appeals board, it has become very apparent that those municipalities that are currently contained within the 10-mile radius of our current ordinance and the requirements that fall upon them and making sure that any kind of building or anything that is done within compliance of our current zoning ordinance, that they are not aware of that. And so one of the things that we have talked about, no matter how the commission moves forward with the potential of adding these additional airports, is that we do need to do an educational platform of some sort with those that do fall into our current zoning, because we were at another meeting and we had somebody say, do you mean X falls within there? And oh my gosh, that could be a problem because of a structure that was built. And so there's a lot of education that does need to be done, no matter whether we bring on these other airports or not. So I just wanted to point that out.
Commissioner Martis.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That was my thoughts too, of some kind of stakeholders meeting where folks would have a chance to participate and be heard and to listen. You're right, probably, except for most township master plans, the airport zoning ordinance is the most ignored document in almost any community. But correct me if I'm wrong, if we don't protect our airspace, isn't some of our funding and stuff tied to protecting like our county airport airspace?
It is, and it's changed most recently. So in the 2024 FAA Reauthorization Act, they have actually identified that your grant assurances, if you're in non-compliance, not only, will you get a slap on the wrist, but the FAA can now fine you for that. So that's a new wrinkle that has previously not been there. So
And when airspace is gone, it's gone.
and it's gone. So, we are seeing a number of airports that, things like the wind turbines, I hate to pick on those, but they are one of the biggest issues we're dealing with right now. Airspace, FAA will grant amended approaches. And so, instead of an airplane being able to come in on a constant descent into an airport, we are seeing where FAA, because they can't deny something, they figure out how to make it work. And so you might get what we call a stepped approach. So an aircraft that used to be able to come in on a constant descent, now with GPS has to come in and level off to maybe clear the wind turbine and then come down. So, it's lost airspace and lost economy. And even in some case, I would argue some safety concerns that we no longer can operate in the traditional fashion in the interest of making it work compared to preserving it.
So what's the process to estimate what this is going to add to our costs to move ahead with this?
I think the hard cost for things like the zoning ordinance language and the graphics is a pretty easy number to quantify. I'm guessing that's probably in the $10,000 range to put those pieces together because they're pretty static. We would map what we need to map. And a lot of it we've done as a part of this presentation to get us even started. The harder question would be the cost to go out and do the public engagement that I would suggest be done compared to, just adopting it here and sight unseen, if you will, for those municipalities that are involved. So that would probably be the unknown for me in terms of how much would it cost of which communities and how much would it take. The upside, I think, is because the 3 airports in the Tecumseh area are all combined within the 3 townships. A group meeting with those are probably easier to do and discuss the why. And then the Blissfield Airport would have to have its own set of conversation potentially, or you could potentially invite everybody in together. I think the hard part's going to be the fact that this isn't new. It's been there. If it hasn't been adopted, that's unfortunate, but it's been on the books since the early 2000s. You're just adding additional strength to it and potentially the county taking over that administration of it. So I anticipate you'll get some pushback from the standpoint of, we didn't know, what do you mean? But we can point to that it has already existed. To Kim's point, there's a lot of it that's happened and we've had some raised eyebrows of, oh, I had no idea. Well, 20 years have passed. It's unfortunate nobody had any idea. So I think that's the part that for me is hard to quantify in terms of how much effort that might take to get it across the finish line.
Commissioner Martis?
Just a couple quick legal questions. So then the zone, because I'm not as familiar with this as traditional land use ordinance changes, the zoning board of appeals, or zoning board, not board of appeals. This group here is, once our vote is that's it. It doesn't have to go to the commission or like a zoning ordinance would to a township board.
That's correct. Once the airport zoning board votes and adopts the ordinance, then your role is complete.
Is it subject to referendum? Could it be?
No.
Okay.
Other commissioners, Tillotson, sorry.
What's the difference between an airport and airspace? I have a neighbor that has a airport where he has an airplane hangar.
Yep.
But it's I presume private,
Right. The one on Ben Oak.
Yes, yes.
The distinction is the public use requirement. So the Airport Zoning Act, which also incorporates the Zoning Enabling Act in Michigan, is applicable to airports that are for public use.
And that's a private airport, so.
Yeah.
Okay, is there any, how would the commission like to move forward?
Looks to me like they want to stand still.
Looks, pardon me?
Looks to me like they want to stand still.
Commissioner Martis?
Well, I think we still have the recommended amendments to the zoning ordinance that need to be considered at some point. And then the unresolved question is whether we want to go ahead with some kind of stakeholder meeting. Sounds like it's kind of being recommended that we do. Even if we don't add any additional airports, there's certainly a need to notify the underlying local units of government of their obligations under the already existing language. So how we want to move forward with that, I don't know.
Commissioner Stimson?
It would seem to be, Commissioner Martis, that would be the appropriate steps, is to maybe hold some stakeholder meetings and gauge interest from the entirety of those individuals, since only one has appeared today. Make sure they're aware of what's going on and then proceed after that.
Which I think we could just do at a regular, we could just schedule another meeting like this and invite them to come.
And have to notify everyone would have.
Well, in the past, generally speaking, we've gone out to those locales. I mean, colloquially, we call it kind of a traveling road show. When you're doing something of this nature, that's typically what transpired. When the Drain Commission did a bunch of work on various different places, that's exactly what they did. When the Road Commission does, they do a lot of that as well. When the county has in the past looked at some broad sweeping changes, they did the same. They maybe grouped some of them together to make it easy, but they went out to the different municipalities. The leadership did.
Administrator Murphy?
And I think this is somewhat what Ms. Ward had alluded to, that is a little bit more difficult to quantify as far as cost. But we do need to determine whether the other private public use airports are interested or not. We obviously have one that has expressed an interest. So we would need to determine that. And I think that depending on what those ownership look like and stuff, having them appear at our meeting in the middle of the day or may not work for those individuals. And so being able to set up a time where we go to them jointly to kind of get some feedback might be a better way to approach it, and then bring that information back to this board to say, you know, we had discussions with this group, and this is how they feel. I think that although we could move forward with approving the language or even approving the ordinance as it is with the current revisions, I think that what I'm interested in is twofold. I don't know if anyone has reviewed the proposed changes that are in the ordinance to date, that less than the potential of bringing on other municipal airports and what that could do to our ordinance. So feedback from all of you on whether you're good or not with this language will allow us to eliminate all of the red line, blue line, and all the information in there as we're working through the process. And then when we are able to meet with the other stakeholders, we could bring that information back to you on whether there is an interest or not. And if there is, then we can continue to modify the ordinance to allow whatever language needs to be added for those airports to then be included. And you can then have an updated, revised ordinance to that effect. But keep in mind, we still have a current ordinance that is in effect until we are good with all of the changes that we want to make to it.
Commissioner Collins?
I just want some clarification that we were talking about public airports and you enumerated where they were. And we also have discussion about private airports. Does this gentleman that Ralph referred to have a private airport? If he can take off and land at his strip? I believe there's one in Onstead also, I think, that has a landing strip. Are those all private airports?
So the distinction is if you are um, anybody could have an airport.
Right.
So the 4 that we've identified here are privately owned, but they're open for public use, which means they're inspected by the state of Michigan
Okay. So
and they maintain a license.
sorry, there are several that are private that don't have such.
Correct. So if it's
License.
if what we call a privately owned, private use airport, they exist. Nobody's inspecting them. We don't know if they have approach surfaces. You know, they could have trees right at the end of the runway, whatever. They're not maintained or inspected by the state of Michigan,
Okay,
nor do they have any of these protections.
now we're talking about including these or not including these airports also.
Not.
Okay. None.
No, I think for clarification, the ones that we are looking at including are the privately owned but publicly used. So if there are any other airports throughout the county, and there are, and they're more of a private, those are not what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I think those are the ones listed. The ones that are listed are the ones that we're talking about.
Those are the ones that the state of Michigan acknowledges as being public use airports within Lenawee County. Correct.
So to move forward, I understand we're going to contact these airports. We're going to schedule another meeting for review of the changes in the airport zoning ordinance that are in your packet today. And at that meeting, we're also going to notify each one of these airports that are listed in Mead and Hunt's presentation today to ask them to attend.
I would suggest that I work with Mead and Hunt to see what that looks like, to reach out to the other airports first. And once we have had those discussions, I will notify the zoning board that we have had those discussions. There is either an interest or there is not an interest. And at that point, schedule another meeting of the zoning board so that we can then get together and convey the information that we have learned so that you guys can then decide how you want to move forward.
Certainly works for me. Commissioner Collins.
Sounds fine, but are we not also going to relay this information to the government entities in those jurisdictions?
I think that we will work to make sure that those that have that interest are at the table, and we've had those discussions. Ms. Hunt has, or excuse me, Ms. Ward, I don't know why I do that to you, sorry. Ms. Ward has that experience, and so I will rely heavily on that experience to make sure that we have the appropriate people at the table for those discussions.
Very good. Any other questions? Okay, we have an action plan moving ahead. Any new business? Public comment? Any additional public comment? Public comment? Hearing none. Commissioners' comments? Very amenable group today. If not, a motion to adjourn would be in order.
So moved.
I have a motion by Commissioner Collins, supported by Commissioner Stimson. All those in favor signify by saying yes.